Again, thank you all. And why don't we go ahead and get started? I know everybody's schedules are busy, and I appreciate you all being here. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mike Haney. I'm the Executive Director of Sonoma County Vintners and Sonoma County Vintners Foundation. And I want to welcome you to our Sonoma County Vintners Winery Processed Water webinar. I know this is an event that many of you have looked forward to, and we're we're very pleased and happy to be able to provide this today. We have a fantastic panel here joining us today from the California Water Board, from E&J Gallo, for Jackson Family Wines, and of course our webinar facilitator today for today's event, Mr. Mike Martini, who's the owner of Taft Street Winery, the Executive Director of SAVE, and of course a board member for Sonoma County Vintners. But let me take this opportunity to introduce our other fantastic panelists. We have Laurel Wardrip, which is a Waste Discharge Requirement Unit Senior, the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Water Quality. Laurel, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. We have Jeremiah Puzet, Senior Environmental Specialist, the North Coast Regional Water Board. Thank you, Jeremiah, again for your time today. We really appreciate it. And then, of course, Melissa Gunter, who is the Water Resource Control Engineer, San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board. Thank you so much. And then, of course, Suzanne Zischel, Director of Environmental Compliance, Jackson Family Wines. Thank you, Suzanne. Again, it's great to see you. And of course, John Nagel, who's the Senior Environmental Manager for E&J Gallo Winery. John, I know you've been involved in this quite a bit, and we surely thank you again for all your time and expertise and comments today as well. So thank you all. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar today. And I will now throw it to Mr. Mike Martini to kind of lead the way through our seminar here and get some great information provided. So Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for all of the panelists for doing this here today. We do know that your time is valuable, and your time is so valuable you do not need to hear from me. This is a significant issue that is coming forward, and it's something that we all as vintners need to be paying attention to. So we're going to jump right into it. And I think we're starting off with Laurel. You're starting, is that correct?
Yeah, I'll be doing the primary slides, and then the panelists will chime in as they'd like. And we also have folks monitoring the chat. So we'll be taking questions at the end, but you can chat in things that come to mind as we're presenting. So it's kind of a group effort that way.
All right, so the only thing that I would ask you, Laurel, you have an audience that is very diverse in their understanding of what's coming at them. I think the number is somewhere around 500 wineries just in Sonoma County alone, and that represents, organizations that have 1-2 people, and then organizations that have 1,200. So, your presentation needs to address all of the issues to all of those kinds of folks, and we appreciate it. So let's understand what are you bringing to Sonoma County for us, and we thank you so much for being so helpful.
Okay.
Real quick question. Hold on a second, 1 second. Is the chat enabled? Just because I wasn't seeing it in order to be able to respond. If anybody has a question while Laurel is talking. I don't know if that's a feature that can happen right now, or maybe it's just me. I just wanted to make sure.
Hi, Melissa. It's Anna with SCV. I did enable the chat, but I'm not seeing it as well. So I'm going to work on the back end to try to clear that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Laurel.
No, it's fine. So I'm going to share my screen, or attempt to, and forgive. I'm going to share, let's see, and you might see yourself for a minute. Okay. So thank you. Thanks for having us here today. This is about the new general waste discharge requirements for winery processed water that are applicable statewide. And we hope that this information is valuable for your members. We understand that any new requirements are a challenge and can be daunting. So we're here as a resource to help facilitate and support industry in this very important project. I wanted to thank also the panelists from the North Coast and the regional, the North Coast and San Francisco Bay Regional Board for being here for this presentation. So we're going to go over the order and some basics. It's a long order, so there's a lot to it. And then we'll go over some of the application enrollment pieces, tier requirements, and the questions and answers at the end. So it's been a long timeline. This is just the timeline after adoption. As many of you know, this project started almost 6 years ago, and the board adopted the order on January 20th, 2021. And there wasn't and then after adoption, the fee schedule was adopted July 6th. So the fee schedule is based on the tiered volumes of processed water produced in the order. So it's not based on some of the other waste discharge requirement fee structures in place today. And we're kind of where the blue arrow is. Enrollment's starting to begin. People are asking questions about how to enroll, and we're working through that. The goal that we have is phase notifications to wineries as we transition to an electronic enrollment process. And there's a few years to do that, where the focus is on wineries that have no waste discharge requirements today. And I'll go through some of those schedules in the next few slides. But the main push right now is to get wineries without any type of regulatory coverage covered by January 20th, 2024. So lots of wineries. California is blessed to have a very robust winery industry. And this order is intended to streamline permitting for wineries statewide. As you can see, there's lots of wine operations going on the coast and the Central Valley. And so those are kind of the core areas that this order engages in. But it is a statewide order. So if there was a winery in Death Valley, it could potentially be enrolled. There are some caveats though. This order doesn't cover every single type of winery operation. It doesn't cover distilleries. It doesn't cover breweries. It doesn't cover meaderies. It covers the production of grape juice or wine. And it's only wineries that produce over 10,000 gallons or up to 15 million gallons of winery processed water per year. So there are some caveats, and that's why it's important to also consider some of the regulatory mechanisms already in place in the state. And in general, it's maybe about 1,500 wineries that might be enrolled in this order over time. It can't happen overnight. So between that 10,000 and 15 million gallon range, the order is tiered. And some of this may be familiar to some wineries in different regions, but basically the requirements and the fees are tiered based on the gallons of processed water produced, where tier 1 is the smallest. It has the fewest requirements. These are the small wineries, as well as tier 2. The requirements kind of go up from there all the way to tier 4. So this is a really important slide to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we're talking. Tier 1's the smallest, tier 4 is the largest. And then there's an exemption cutoff where wineries are exempt, so they don't have to enroll in the order unless the regional board finds threats to water quality where that would be necessary, as described in detail in the order. So when it comes to enrollment, and I know that this is a big unknown here. So there's kind of 3 buckets in the order when it talks about enrollment schedules and compliance schedules. Excuse me. The first one is existing wineries with current waste discharge requirements. This is going to happen over time. These could be general WDRs or waste discharge requirements. These could be individual WDRs. These could be waivers. The discharger, as well as the regions and state board, we're going to have to work through which wineries, depending on the type of disposal systems they have, their size, what kind of features they have, if the statewide order is appropriate. And if not, how else would they, what do they stay in their current order, or what's the next step? So this is a phase, kind of a longer term project in the order. The priority in the order is the blue box here. The second one, with existing wineries without WDRs, it's an on-level playing field. And we would like to ensure that we support these wineries first, and especially because there's a schedule in the order requiring these wineries to enroll within 3 years of adoption. Like I said, which puts us to January 20th, 2024. When a winery enrolls, they don't have to be 100% in compliance on day one. The order includes up to a 5-year compliance schedule that the winery can propose in their notice of intent, which is their application. And so there's lots of time to get ready and to, comply with the order. And then there's a new winery bucket. So if you're a new winery being built, you're expected to be designed to comply, and then you enroll 180 days prior to opening your doors. You'd already be enrolled in the order. So what does enrollment mean? I know that that's kind of a jargony term. So it means one, dischargers or wineries will have to determine if this order applies. I can't stress that enough. How much gallons of processed water are you producing? What kind of features do you have? Do you have rapid infiltration basins in a 16 million gallon per year winery? Maybe this isn't the right order for you. So there's a size component. Are you even producing wine or grape juice, or are you a meadery? I know that these are kind of bunched in some of the federal tax lists, and so they're not all the same. So the first thing is determining if the order applies. The second is actually submitting your application, which is called application notice of intent, report of waste discharge. Basically what it is your notice of intent, which is the application, the technical report filled out from the actual order, and then the fee per the fee schedule that was adopted July 6th. The next step is that the regional board takes that application and reviews it, and they issue a notice of applicability as well as your final monitoring and reporting program. The order includes a model MRP, and it includes a template notice of intent, the technical report, but that all gets reviewed, and then the regional board actually issues the notice of applicability, which is your regulatory coverage under the order. I will say that if we do a statewide electronic notice of intent, even if it's at state board, it's still the regional staff and support with state board staff looking at those applications. And then once a winery is enrolled, it's all about compliance. And you start beginning your upgrades. So when you submit your notice of intent, you submit that compliance schedule you're proposing, the regional board approves your final compliance schedule, and then you actually start implementing it. And at the same time, you commence monitoring and you begin actually implementing the order. There are monthly non-compliance letters. So if there's instances of non-compliance, you send that letter in to the agency. And then there's also an annual fee and an annual report. So we're going to jump to technical requirements. And so that's kind of the overview of, the application and administrative procedures. Now we get into the way the order actually addresses water quality concerns and loading from wineries. So there are requirements for all tiers to implement general salt control practices to address the loading in the processed water. And then there's specific requirements for tier 2 through 4, where there's a new fixed dissolved solids threshold. And it's a measurement of basically the residual solids from that operation, and it's measured in the lab. Suzanne, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to make it clear, maybe you want to make it clear where you take that measurement, because that's a little different compared to previous WDRs.
Yeah, the measurement is in the source water. At the facility.
No, I mean, you compare the source water to the water in the sump before it goes to treatment, correct?
Yeah, it's the source water plus the water you use in making the product. And so that it's an annual average, so it's not an instantaneous threshold. And the concentration is the source water, so you have to sample the water being used in the production plus the 320 milligrams per liter threshold. So it's not holding accountable the actual source water. There's very little you can do for that, but it is putting a cap on what you can add, basically. And then there's requirements for tier 2 through 3, where if you exceed this threshold, it's not a violation to exceed the threshold. It's a violation potentially if you don't do any follow-up actions that are required. So for tier 2 through 3, a follow-up action might be that the region requires you to develop a salt control plan. For tier 4, which is the largest tier, if there's exceedances, which is this annual average, you have to submit a salt control plan to the region. There are all alternatives to that site-specific plan. You can do a sustainability enrollment that covers salt control, as well as a salt and nutrient management plan participation to address the exceedances. I also want to note that the Environmental Lab Accreditation Program just began offering accreditation for fixed dissolved solids, and the standard method is 2540E-2011. So analytical labs should continue getting accredited for that method. They're accredited for part of the method already, many of them. Okay, so process water ponds, we're going to move to those, and these are termed treatment ponds sometimes, but these are the process water ponds. These are the ponds where your winery effluent or water coming from your winery goes into a pond system. That's what we're talking about. The requirements are tiered, where tier 1 has general pond specifications, and then when you apply, if you have ponds in your tier 1 winery, you report the current capacity and hydraulic conductivity or lined status of those ponds. So you pretty much give them the information on the ponds. There are no explicit upgrades required of those ponds if they're performing well. The second tier is the tier 2 ponds, and these are existing ponds. So tier 2 wineries that have existing ponds have general specifications like dissolved oxygen and setbacks from the high water table. And they report their current status of the liner and the sizing in their notice of intent. However, new tier 2 ponds and all tier 3 ponds, so new, expanding, existing, have additional requirements. There's a pond sizing requirement at the 100-year 24-hour storm event, unless you get approval from the region to get down to the 25-year 24-hour, which requires the discharger to provide the technical justification for that. Think of things like annual historic rainfall events, water balance, technical pieces that demonstrate your pond can perform at that smaller size without overtopping or environmental issues. And then there's a hydraulic conductivity requirement, which is basically demonstrating the pond is not leaking significantly processed water into the underlying groundwater or ground. And then there's ongoing testing to demonstrate that it continues to perform correctly. There are a few different ways you can meet the liner requirement. There isn't just one standard. You can do many different options for how you meet that standard. And then tier 4 is the tier 3 requirements plus. There's groundwater monitoring required for your ponds. There are some exemptions available if they apply. If there's smaller pond systems in tier 4 that are sized in less than 1 million gallons of processed water per year, then you can ask the regional board for an exemption in your notice of intent and see if they approve it. We'll move to land application area specifications, and you might hear me say land application area, or LAA. I prefer actually kind of to say it out. So for tier 1, there's general specifications. You can't, and there's prohibitions. For example, you can't overrun the processed water to surface waters. It's prohibited. And then there's general specifications for when you apply and things like that. So very operational. And then it goes to tier 2, where there's general specifications as well, like there's setbacks for your land application areas from sensitive features like surface waters or water supply wells for drinking water. And then there's some requirements for setbacks from the property line. For the land application areas, it's 5 feet as long as there's no discharge, because it's prohibited. And there are some limits. One is an average biochemical oxygen demand limit at 100 pounds per acre per day over an averaging cycle. So when you apply it for that irrigation cycle, it's an averaging over that period. There's also the requirement to apply constituents at an agronomic rate, which means that it's considering a minimal leaching fraction and actually uptake of the nitrogen from a plant. So there are requirements to meet an agronomic rate. And I think the biggest difference in this order is that we use the term crop uptake and we require the winery to provide a number. So basically, whatever crop you're irrigating with the process water, you would provide that published value for the crop uptake. How much nitrogen does that, for example, does that crop take up? And then you have that for your annual nitrogen balance, which is required in this order. I will note that there's published values, and then wineries can propose a value to the region. The order also allows a crop tissue sample, and unfortunately at this time, that capacity to do that has not been built. It's not an accredited method, but if industry and laboratories find a market and want to do it, we're here to help make that happen. But we need a little support from industry and the labs to get a method together. So for land application, it's additive as well. So it goes tier 3 plus tier 4. There's groundwater monitoring required for the land application area. And there are some exemptions or some alternatives here. So if there's certain siting features for the distance of the land application area zone from the groundwater, if it's far enough away from a drinking water well, there's siting exemptions that are available. And there's also a concept of an area-wide groundwater monitoring network, so that one winery in and of itself is not solely responsible for all of the wells being, funded on their property. It can be a more regional or area-wide network that demonstrates and can assess the constituents being discharged from wineries. So it has to be a network for winery kind of discharges to groundwater. There's a lot that could be said about that one, but it's an encouraging and interesting piece of the order. So the third thing is the subsurface disposal system specification. So these are the leach fields. These are the septic systems to the leach fields. And the order does allow separate treatment of domestic wastewater and winery process water, and then the combined disposal. And then there's also ones that it's just winery process water, but know that there are some exceptions given for if you have a combined system. We acknowledge that and have some paths forward. The next few slides, though, are focused on just the winery process water, septic to leach kind of system here. So if you're in tier 1, there's general specifications for just managing your leach system and your septic tank. There's inspections on your tank and making sure that everything's working properly, making sure that there's no daylighting of the water, and there's just general practices. Tier 2 has those general practices as well, but there's a hydraulic loading limit at 1 gallon a square foot per trench per day. And then there's also effluent limits. So there's effluent limits on the treated effluent coming out of your tank before you discharge it to your leach. And in that, it's for nitrogen, biochemical oxygen demand, and total suspended solids. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read out the limits, but the most concerning one is the 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. And there's a groundwater monitoring alternative if the systems can't meet that. But it's important to note that the effluent limit is not a single sample, it's a 3 sample average. And there's also time schedules provided or compliance schedules to upgrade your systems to be in compliance. And then if there's exceedances of those effluent limits, there's the requirement to submit a control plan for existing systems that are built before, enrollment. Those, they only have to submit the nitrogen control plan if the region asks for them. But if there is a new system or an expanded system, you'd submit that plan. And there are also some alternatives to that plan for tier 2, like sustainability plan participation or salt nutrient management planning as alternatives to address the exceedances. For tier 3 and 4, it's additive on tier 2, but all of basically when you exceed those effluent limits, you're required to submit a nitrogen control plan. And there is the alternative, a salt nutrient management plan participation, which is like a regional plan that addresses salt and nutrient management. They're comprehensive plans. They have them for each region or basin. So they're large plans that the wine industry could get involved in. And then in tier 4, groundwater monitoring is required for subsurface disposal systems. There are no off ramps or exemptions to that. So we're going to move to monitoring. I know that's a lot of information, and I'm glad it's recorded because it helps people to look at it later. So the order has a monitoring and reporting program. It's called the model MRP because the region actually approves the final one. And it has tier dependent compliance monitoring. So as you move up in the tiers, there's additional requirements. There's compliance reporting, the annual report, the water quality sampling, the monthly non-compliance letters, and then there's site dependent monitoring locations, depending on what kind of features you have at your winery. Basically, if you don't have a pond, you don't have to do pond groundwater monitoring, or if you don't have a pond, you don't have to do pond monitoring. So there are some features that are site dependent. Next steps. So here we are, we're going into implementation of the order with it adopted. We're going to be implementing the fee schedule and electronic notice of intent. And we're here to support industry and answer questions. I just want to let you know we're going to have new guidance materials on our website as we make them available. Things like compliance calendars, monitoring report templates, and an annual report template. I want to thank everybody for your time. Here's our contact information, and stay informed. We have an e-Lyris list as things come out. We email folks, and here's our program page. And if you're looking for labs, here's a list of labs. I'm going to stop the share, or I'll keep the share, but I'm going to stop talking. So thank you.
So what I would suggest at this time, I know we've got a couple other speakers, but I got a couple quick questions, from your slides. Maybe interject them right now if that's okay with you. The first one, you talk about the tiers are determined by the volume of processed wastewater. Most small wineries have no idea how much processed wastewater they produce. Is this now going to have some metering regulation that small wineries need to meter how much processed wastewater they're using or generating?
So some wineries might, depending on where you get your water supply and how the winery is set up, but some might be able to gauge that based on their monthly water bill or how much water they bought. Some might be able to figure it out from their well pumping if they have some operation on how much they pump to use for their wine making. And then some, yes, will have to install a flow meter to measure the gallons of processed water per year. I'd say this same if you had to do gallons of processed water per day, which many wineries are required to do. So there is some math and some upfront work to be done to determine what tier you're in.
The second question, I remember reading somewhere in the order reference to tank and haul, which most people around here refer to as hold and haul. If that is adopted, does that exempt the facility from compliance with this WDR?
It's a great question. So if a winery has no discharges of their winery processed water to land, then this order doesn't technically apply. However, there are local ordinances and requirements to be a good steward, as wineries are already, with that hold and haul or tank and haul operation to reduce spills and not have good procedures to prevent spilling. But
the last one I have would be on the timing. You were very clear. You've got 3 years to enroll and then 5 years to comply. Is the 5 years to comply, though, is determined by the enrollment. So if I understand this, if I chose to enroll this year, I only have 5 years to comply, which would get me out to 2026. You're setting yourself up that everybody enrolls at the last possible minute, so that they have the maximum amount of time to comply. Have you guys thought about that at all, or is that something that's even on your horizon?
Oh, absolutely. So some wineries, they're trying to get ready to enroll sooner because they need coverage. So I would put it, maybe frame it a little different, is that wineries without coverage right now have some liability for not having regulatory coverage for their discharges to land. And so it's in the interest of the winery to enroll as soon as possible to have the best time and the most time with the regulators to help them in that process. Waiting to the last minute, it happens in every program. It's not advisable to give you better customer service, but we will do everything we can to support that if everybody waits to the last minute. A few ways we're going to do that is some type of phase notification to get people thinking about it faster. And then also the 3 years was given to wineries to make sure they had time to get their applications together and give them a good robust time to enroll. So it was actually to the industry that we did that. And then another piece is that the 5 years is not granted or given. It's that you propose up to 5 years in your application. The regional board actually issues the final approved compliance schedule, and it can be less than 5 years, depending on the situation at the winery.
So that's probably a great segue into the next set of panelists. My understanding, this is going to be administered by the North Coast Regional Board, or is this coming out of Sacramento?
This is coming from the State Water Resources Control Board, so the state board, but we are working very closely with all the regional boards, including the North Coast and San Francisco Bay. So it's coming from all of us, and these statewide orders include the regions and state board together.
Gotcha. So Jeremiah or Melissa, who's next?
Well, I just wanted to note that John
We're
Nagel
together.
has his hand up. Yeah, we're all together on that, but John has his hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to ask a question, John.
Thank you, Melissa.
Mhm.
No, not ask a question, just a couple comments. As far as metering available, a lot of people have service equipment or equipment on their existing water systems that they may not know already has metering systems on it. You know, even if you have a water softener or acid neutralizer or some other type of treatment system, there's usually a meter attached to it, which no one really pays attention to, but it's there already. And also flow data can be developed by looking at your PG&E bill and how much electricity you're using based upon the size of pump you have. So that data may be available already to the winery owners. And then also if you start looking at tiering, right? So they talked about tierings and the number of gallons that exist. So I just want to put that in perspective. Let's say it takes you 10 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of wine. So if you're having a 10,000 gallon tier 1, that's about 500 cases of wine. And so you're just doing the math, looking at, you know, what the average for winery to wastewater to wine ratios are, and figure out number of cases that is. You can figure out essentially, you know, where you're at in general. So different breakpoints are about 500 cases, tier 2, you know, 1,400 cases, tier 3, you know, 14,000 cases. So they're just kind of a general, since everybody has different ratios between how much water they use in the winery versus how much wine they produce. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback, John. That's really helpful.
So Jeremiah or Melissa, do you have comments you want to add?
Yeah, Mike, just thanks again for having us today. Just to reiterate that the state board adopts these statewide permits and then gets support and provides support to the regions. So my staff and myself are going to be contacts, and we'll be working on this. Rachel Pratt in the North Coast region will be working on our enrollments. We have some extensive outreach with some of our stakeholders as well. Appreciate this meeting and webinar. And yeah, Melissa works for Margaret Monahan over in Region 2, and she'll be the primary contact. And what we have spoken at great length many times is the need to have close coordination, because we share Sonoma County. So some locations are going to be in the Region 2 boundary, and some are going to be in the North Coast boundary. And that general cutoff runs around the Catalia Grade, Petaluma area, and a lot of folks are familiar with that. We do have maps on our website that show the distinct boundaries for that. And if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to follow up on that. But just wanted to make sure folks understand that Region 1 and 2 do share Sonoma County. So in addition to that
that boundary, we are looking at the fact that there's existing regulatory tools with the North Coast. So we do have slightly different issues to tackle in the North Coast, where we do have a lot of existing wineries that are enrolled in our regulatory measures, something a little bit different from the Region 2 situation. So I just wanted to add a little context for that for people to think of, and I'm sure we'll be answering those questions and helping people sort out where they land.
So
Who they'll be talking
let's
to.
just follow up on that if we can, Jeremiah, please.
Mhm.
So if we have somebody in Sonoma County who is interested in starting the enrollment process, do they contact the regional board that they're located in, or do they contact Sacramento?
They can contact the regional water board. Yeah.
Okay. And I didn't see that, and it may have been on that slide. Is that slide, Laurel, that you showed that had the contact information? The regional board contact information is there?
The San Francisco Bay email
I
is there.
apologize. That only has, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, Laurel,
and
go ahead.
Jeremiah, if you want to state the Region 1 email, we wanted to add it, it just didn't quite get in there. But if you email State Board, we work with the regions really close. So we will be coordinating. If a winery from Region 1 said, hey, State Board, I want to enroll, I'd be immediately contacting Jeremiah's team, and we would be working through those next steps. We do have some procedures there.
Jeremiah, if you could just forward that,
Yeah,
you don't need to read it out, but if you could just forward that to Michael Haney so that we can include it in that data, that would be very helpful.
Yes,
Suzanne,
absolutely.
you've been involved with this from day one. Have you got general comments, anything you want to add? I imagine you do.
Well, comments that I will share. So taking a step back. So Laurel, good presentation. Jeremiah and Melissa, everybody's been a great partner. This permit took over 5 years to develop, and it went through 2 completely different State Water Resources Board teams, and it's now 124 pages. So, it's a lot. It's a lot for me, it's a lot for John, and it's certainly a lot for smaller wineries that don't have a, environmental person dedicated to the company. But at this point, I have to say the people on the screen, they're great partners. We're all looking for a path forward that will reduce cost and reduce the efforts the winery takes. And so I do encourage people to reach out to Melissa, to Jeremiah, to Rachel, and to Laurel for assistance. And along with Wine Institute, the Farm Bureau, CCSW, SIP, we're all working together to create the tools that are needed to make implementation easier. It's calendars, it's monitoring schedules. We're looking at creative groundwater monitoring programs to cost share the regional programs that Laurel talked about, and any possible way that we can just work together to make this easier to go forward. Laurel, Melissa, Jeremiah, Rachel, they're all great people, easy to work with. They've developed this permit and they want to help us comply with it. So with that, I don't know, John, you have anything to add?
You're still muted, John.
That I am. So no, it's been a long process, and there's been a lot of work done behind the scenes. The original drafts that came up, we worked hard to create lower risks for lower tiers for those people who have lower risk. And but I would urge you not to take this lightly. The section that Laura covered over with subsurface systems, basic septic systems, that's going to be critical. There's a lot of changes that will impact those people with septic systems, and then of course all about the land loading issues. So as we try to make it as easy a path forward, there will be difficulties, and early on, you should learn and understand what's in front of you so that you're not surprised, and you can start working now to build it into whatever process you need to do to ensure that you'll be in compliance in the long run. So don't take it lightly, take it seriously, read the sections that apply to you, reach out, as Suzanne said, to the regulators to find out, what your future is going to be.
So I'd actually ask a favor, both you, John, and Suzanne, and this is not meant in any way as a slur against the water boards, but to ask your availability to help work with smaller wineries and answer the questions. Oftentimes, it's better to get some answers from somebody who understands their business. And you guys are both wealth of information on this thing. The challenge you're going to have is, yes, I agree with you, John. This is a very significant issue that we all need to take seriously. But you got to remember that every single one of these small wineries is dealing with 20 other significant issues in regulatory orders from whether it's pesticide, groundwater, air quality. The list goes on and on and on, and there's just not the resources available at the smaller level to deal with this.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely, Mike. Yeah, there is an onslaught of new regulations and ongoing regulations. And I think I speak for John that, yes, either of us is always available to help our brethren in the industry to interpret the permit and figure out the best path forward. Again, deeply involved with Wine Institute, Sonoma Vintners, and others to create tools that do just what you're asking. But John and I, of course, will be available to assist in any way we can.
And Mike, I can tell you that if we have members in wineries that have additional questions, if they want to relay those to info@sonomawine.com, I am happy to make sure we send those questions or comments out to the appropriate people to get some assistance ASAP for them.
So Michael, I didn't see that the chat was ever activated. So we don't have necessarily questions from any other participants who are sitting in on this?
Yeah, the chat function won't activate here. So if anyone does have questions, they can surely contact me at info@sonomawine.com. We'll surely be able to get those answers for you in a very timely manner.
I want to underscore that for everybody who's participating in the webinar, that the Sonoma Vintners, we take this very seriously, and we want to help our members navigate this process that's coming at us. So please reach out. As Mike pointed out, we'll make sure that we get that link up as well, so that we can get you in touch with the people to answer the questions. The other, I think, resource that was there, Laurel, thank you. I think you gave a number of labs that can contacts at the lab, but there's also individuals, firms that deal with assistance on compliance on these issues, and I don't believe the Vintners is going to be recommending any one or another, but we'll put together a list of other consultants that are active in this arena and familiar with the requirements as a resource for our members to get through this thing.
And if I could add a few comments, if you don't mind, Mike.
I would love a few more comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is Melissa Gunter. I'm with the San Francisco Water Board. And so I just wanted to, just a few things, a top response to some topics that have been discussed just right about now. I mean, ultimately, we want to also recognize that we're not perceiving the wine industry as in a negative light at all. I mean, our task here really is ultimately the protection of water quality and beneficial uses of the water quality in agricultural, wineries, and as well as, there are so many beneficial uses of the water resources of the state that we have to take into consideration. And so also recognizing, and I know that there's nothing that I can do about this right now, but just wanted to express really compassion for the fact that there is a lot of regulatory landscapes to be navigating. And I know that we recognize how challenging that is, which is which is running in the back of the mind the whole time that we've been working on this effort. And also wanted to also deeply recognize the impacts that the wildfires and COVID have had on wineries. And we feel that as well, which is a part of why there was a longer time for enrollment, and then also a longer time for compliance, recognizing the capital improvement funds that might be necessary. So I just kind of want to put those out there to just, because I know sometimes it can seem just a hierarchy of regulatory continuously banging on you. And so it's to say we're seeing that and want to try to support a fluid transition into this order. And I have to thank John and Suzanne so deeply for continuing to show up over the years and really provide extremely valuable and meaningful feedback that has been incorporated into this. And also one other piece is it is overwhelming, I can imagine, at first jumping into this order. And so that's why another thing that we're doing from the water board side is providing and developing guidance materials. Now, granted, of course, the insights that Suzanne and John and colleagues of yours in the industry can provide will, of course, be a little bit different lens potentially than from the regulatory landscape, but also knowing that we are seeing this order not just through the regulatory eyes, and we are both the state board and each of these regional boards are involved regularly with developing implementation plans and approaches and processes to support this on-ramping not being as overwhelming, but recognizing that there's still a lot to that. So I just kind of wanted to say a few of those things in the mix, and I also see that John has his hand up as well. So.
John, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to just talk about tools development and state board, Laura, things that are needed. And, we had talked before about that clear flow chart, right? Taking each of the different sizes through their compliance processes over the years, the yes and no's, does this apply, does that not apply? Clear, specific tools so that people can find their path through a flowchart process, as opposed to flipping through the different pages, finding the different sections. And that just, once again, I just want to reiterate how helpful that would be to a layperson picking this up.
Thank you, John. And Melissa, thank you for those comments. It's my Jesuit training to be a little bit grumpy, I think, about a lot of issues. And I can't help but ask, Laurel pointed out that, this WDR order is only for wineries. A lot of other agricultural processing facilities are not impacted by this order. And what I've never heard in this process at all was, do you guys have any evidence whatsoever that winery processed water was negatively impacting anything to a degree that warrants this? I have not seen anything of a specific winery event or events where it's even raises to the issue, and yet it was chosen to be one of the, you guys worked on it for 5 years in order to bring forward. It's kind of like you found a solution to not a problem.
Okay, so yeah, and I understand the frustration coming through you. And I also wanted to thank Suzanne and echo what Melissa said, and John and the Wine Institute and all the industry partners, because the order would look a lot different if they hadn't been at the table and actually supporting industry and their challenges and things. So I want to echo that. I want to say that this project started way before my time in WDRs, but it's not an excuse. It's just saying that there was a partnership that it was going to streamline requirements statewide And there are existing regulatory mechanisms for protecting groundwater quality from winery waste discharges to land. So the state has been trying to grapple with what and how best to provide this to the wine industry. I will note that there's a gap in data to demonstrate compliance or the other way, but there is data from all these different industries that can show potential. And so it's not so much about proving that there's an impact, it's to prevent impacts. And we can't go back in time and say why exactly, or why was wineries, I wouldn't look at it as you're picked on. It was that there was a project that started a long time ago to have a statewide order for wineries. I have given feedback internally that, hey, we need to really consider, statewide orders and what we're trying to get out of them moving forward, but we are here to work together on implementation at this time. So yeah, I understand your frustration.
Jeremiah, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to tag on to actually many of the things that were just said, but that last part, the North Coast region has had orders on wineries since 2002, some individual ones that go back much further. We have seen some isolated issues. We have had some enforcement cases. We have had some discharges. I don't really want to pick on anybody or name any names. Your question is a legitimate one and a common one that folks might not have the level of knowledge that we do with the water boards. Also, the thing to be aware of is that the water boards regulate potential discharges as well. And when we're coming together, especially in this time of drought, to look at protecting our water resources, groundwater is one of the highest and most important resources that we can protect for future generations. And kind of going back to what Melissa said earlier about agricultural uses and protecting our charge, one of the beneficial uses that we protect is agriculture. We want to ensure for future generations that we're not loading too much nitrogen or too much salt that will foul the groundwater or the land that has been used for agriculture. And again, our charge is to protect water quality. With all of that being said, if the water board shows up and does an inspection, I want people to understand that compliance assistance is our first step always. And I think Melissa really echoed some great empathy that is indeed that we have. Yes, we are bureaucratic and we are an agency that has enforcement authority, and people generally look at us and say, oh my gosh, if I step on the line, does that mean $1,000 or $10,000? And the answer to that is no. There can be some egregious situations, but generally it's best to acknowledge when there is a problem to help bring us into that loop and to help try to find solutions, because frankly, when we're talking about resources of small wineries, the resources of the regional water boards are about 1,000 hours in this next fiscal year. That doesn't go very far when it talks about compliance assistance and enrollment and enforcement. So it's really partnerships like this and the intent of the state board and the regional water boards to get that information out there and give folks time, and also to join in meetings like this so we're not the bureaucratic boogeyman, so to speak, and that you can have conversations with us and we will assist in understanding, and these folks on this call will also assist with that. But I just wanted to give folks the idea that it's better to talk to us than not, and not to necessarily think that we are going to lead with some enforcement or the hammer first. Compliance assistance is clearly the first step in our charge in protecting water quality.
That's actually quite reassuring to hear, Jeremiah, and we're going to hold you to it. So thank you for that. It is a partnership.
I understand it's being recorded.
That's true. You can't back out of this thing. 40% of the participants didn't believe we had this conversation. Now that's another issue. But I do want you to know, I mean, Sonoma County is at the forefront in terms of sustainability. Our growers are incredible. Our wineries are incredible. I mean, they're led, you got the large producers like Gallo and Jackson family are doing incredible things, to work towards sustainability. So we are partners in this. And I'm hoping that everybody who is watching this webinar is aware of that. The Sonoma Vintners, we are a resource to help you through this. And I do believe your comments, Jeremiah and Melissa, that the regional board, you are the resource as well. And you're going to help us get through this thing. And at the end of the day, it may be a little bit better. And I don't think anybody's opposed to that. So we're coming up on an hour. Are there any final comments that anybody wants to put into the record before we call it a day? So again, listen, I just want to thank you all because I know you got a lot on your plate. We are going to take you seriously in terms of, the assistance. Suzanne and John, thank you on behalf of the rest of the industry for watching this, participating in it, working with all of the other within the industry to do it. It is appreciated, and want to thank you for that. Michael Haney, anything final comments you want to make?
Mike, thank you so much. First, as you said, I want to thank all of our fantastic panel here today. I really appreciate not only the time, but the great information shared. John and Suzanne as well. Thank you for bringing that industry perspectives too, because that is so valuable as we talked about the small wineries here, which make up a large percentage of our membership here at Sonoma County Vintners. So thank you all. To everyone out there, thank you for joining us today. We will be posting this entire webinar and sending it out to all of our members. And as I said earlier, if you have follow-up questions or comments or need some assistance, please don't hesitate to let us at Vintners know. Send me an email at info@sonomawine.com, and we are happy to help in any way we can. So thank you all so much for all your great information today.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Be safe out there.